All right, so we are here to talk about osmosis, and osmosis is the movement of water from high to low concentration. It is a type of passive energy. It does not require any, passive transport, sorry, it does not require any energy. And what we're going to see is we're always going to see water goes towards the hypertonic solution. And hypertonic solution means the higher concentration. So I don't know if you can read that. This little cell, this little bag inside this beaker full of fluid is 0.1 molar. This is 0.5. So since the 0.5 is higher than 0.1, this would be hypertonic, and we would expect to see water come out of the bag and into the beaker, the solution in the beaker. The reason osmosis happens is because you have some kind of solute, maybe sugar, maybe salt, whatever, in your water, dissolved in there as a solute, but it's so big it can't cross the membrane. So you have some kind of membrane that has holes in it that water can get through, but your solutes cannot. And so one thing I want to show you really quickly with this drawing is when you have lots of water, you're going to have very few solutes. So this is going to be a low concentration of solute, but a high concentration of water. Okay? And it is going to be which we'll talk about more in just a second, hypotonic, meaning it has a lower, this 0.1 would be hypotonic, the 0.5 would be hyper. Think about hypo means under, hyper. Think about when somebody's hyper, they have tons of energy, because hyper means above. So this would be hyper, this would be hypo. Because this has very few solutes in it, it is hypotonic. Because the hypo and hypertonic is talking about the solutes, not the water. All right, now let's look at this side. This side, we have a bunch of solutes, so it's hypertonic, which means it has a high concentration of solutes. Okay, and because those solutes are taking up more room, it doesn't have as much room for water, so it has a lower concentration of water. Okay, so basically when you have a hyper and hypotonic solution, they're always going to be together. You're never going to have one without the other. And the other thing to note is whatever your concentration of solutes is, your concentration of water is going to be lower. Like I mentioned a minute ago, osmosis is the movement of water from a high concentration to a low concentration. And if you'll remember, I also said that water always moves towards the hypertonic solution. Okay? Well, look at what that means. If it's moving towards the hypertonic, it's moving from a high concentration of water to a low concentration of water. So the goal is to move some of these water molecules across so that the ratio of water to solute is equal on both sides. So I didn't count this up, but let's say there's 20 waters and 10 solutes. Well, that's a 2-to-1 ratio. So it's going to even itself out until there are 2 waters for every solute on both sides. Okay, so that's the goal of osmosis, is to get the same amount of water and solutes on both sides. All right, so let's look at some examples or some other things. Like I mentioned a minute ago, hyper and hypotonic are always together. This would be hypertonic because it has more solutes. Red is the solute. And this is hypotonic as compared to this. Remember, again, those are always terms that are used together because you're comparing them to each other. So this is hypotonic because it has fewer solutes. Water is always going to move towards the hypertonic solution. Okay. The other term that you may hear is isotonic. Iso means equal. So isotonic solutions are those in which you have equal amounts of water and solutes on both sides. So this is 0.3 molar, this is 0.3 molar. Okay, so they are equally concentrated on both sides. Now the thing that people don't realize and what people will get wrong sometimes is they say, okay, well the water must not move. If it always moves towards hypertonic and there's no hypertonic, it must not move. But that's not the reality. The reality is that water is going to move, but it's going to move both ways equally. So for every water that moves to the left, one is going to move to the right. So water never stops moving. It's just, is it moving more in one direction or is it moving back and forth equally? All right, so I can describe osmosis. I can give examples of osmosis. And so examples of osmosis are like with your cells, water coming into your cells. Or this example we looked at over here with the little baggie. We also did the lab with the potato, sweet potato, and apple. So that's another example of osmosis. And then it says, I can describe the movement of water when a cell is exposed to a hypertonic solution. So here we have our cell. It is in a hypertonic solution, which means, I should have made it a little bigger, it is hypo, okay? And so out here is the hyper, and we know that water always moves towards the hypertonic. So what we're going to see is water is going to leave our cell. It's going to move out into that hypertonic solution, and our cell is going to shrink and shrivel up like a raisin, okay? So that's what's going to happen when you put a cell in a hypertonic solution. It's going to shrivel. All right, it's going to dehydrate, basically. All right, what if it's in a hypotonic solution? Well, if it's hypotonic, the cell is hyper. Okay, so if the solution out here is hypo, because remember, you always have to use those two terms together, then the cell must be hyper. Well, remember, water always moves towards hypertonic. So water is going to come into the cell, and your cell is going to swell up. And it may even burst. Okay, like our cells can't handle this, they would eventually burst. So a hypotonic solution, you're going to see your cells swell. And then what about if it's in an isotonic solution? So it is equal inside and outside. Again, a lot of people say, well, the water doesn't move, but that's not accurate. The water does move. It is just moving in and out equally. And so what you're going to see is you're going to see your cells stay the same size. It's not going to shrink. It's not going to swell. All right, and so those are your three I can statements there. The last one is I can define osmoregulation and discuss its importance. Osmoregulation is simply the process of regulating your water and solute balances in your body. It is what we do to keep from getting dehydrated or overhydrated. Our kidneys do the vast amount of this for us. Other organisms, it's their skin, their kidneys. I mean, it just really depends. Plants use their stomata and their roots. Roots bring in water, stomata lose water. So all organisms have a way to regulate their water balance, but it is important because it's a way to maintain homeostasis. If you were to lose that homeostatic balance of your water and solute concentrations, the organism would die. And so the organisms are willing to spend some energy on that. It's a little bit important. So they're willing to spend a little energy to make sure that they're getting the water that they need, or if they have excess water, they can get rid of that. So that is osmosis and how water moves depending on the different types of solutions, and what osmoregulation is and why it is so important. And I hope that helps.